Hello, everyone. This is Zachariah, and my team and I will be discussing Hydra One ERM framework and the risk management that they adapted in their company. So, just to give you a quick information about the company, they basically started way early in the 20th century in 1906, and it's absolute, of course, electricity company that provide electricity to a lot of cities and countries. Um, but their headquarter in Canada, Toronto, that's where they mainly started. And they went public and they start uh, publicly trading their stocks in 2015, in November. And their revenue is almost 6 billion, which is, that's a very huge company. So since Hydro One is electricity company, so they are exposed to a lot of risks. Just like any other company, they are exposed to their own risks, and Hydro One has its own risks. They have three-stage process that they follow on how they manage risks and how they come up with ERM framework and how they train their team and their employees and their executives to be part of this risk management. So I'm going to discuss these three steps. And the first step is risk workshop. So basically, they meet with their team to discuss risks that the company is facing. They interview different teams from different departments and to identify the risks, and they create a risk key register and risk heat map, and they come up with mitigation plan on how to manage these risks that the company identified. And what's unique about this company that every person is part of uh, the risk management and decision making, not just the executive, but everyone is a risk owner because everyone is facing a different risk from the company. So that's a unique thing about the enterprise risk management framework that they have is not just the executives, but the entire team is involved in this decision making. Then the second stage is reviewing the corporate risk profile. So basically, they meet twice a year, every January and July, to basically discuss what happened in the past and how can they change things in their risk management framework and how they can move forward and add new things and come up with new plans to face the future risks that they might encounter. And the last stage is basically risk-based investments. Um, they work with experts and engineers to identify big risks and try to come up with projects. And also, it's an investment for the company to mitigate these risks in the future. And these are the three stages of the risk management framework that the company came up with. And also, they have a risk appetite, a risk tolerance that the company set. So basically, like the maximum risk that they can take. So I drew this graph basically to shows or kind of explains the risk appetite and tolerance. So if you look at this timeline basically, or this risk line, you can see the low risk on the left side and the high risk on the right side. And the risk appetite is basically where the company is comfortable to stay. Like this is the kind of risk that we're comfortable to stay in. And the risk tolerance is like the maximum risk that the company can handle. Anything above that will be considered a high risk. I can show you another graph that explains this. Is basically, if you look at this, this is like the performance of the company. And we see here, this is like the best case scenario and the worst case scenario. And this entire thing, they call it risk universe. This is the maximum risk, like the best case and the worst case could happen to the company. Risk tolerance is basically what is the maximum risk that the company can take. And a little bit less than that, it's the risk appetite. Like this is where the company wants to stay at. This is the maximum risk that the company can handle. Anything above that will be considered risk. Now I'm going to hand it to Bob to tell you more about the ERM culture of Hydro One.
Taking a look at Hydro One's risk culture, we could draw comparisons from Jet Propulsion Lab's risk program, and we can determine the success that it will have on the firm as a whole. So prior to the implementation of Fraser's ERM program, the metrics quantifying risk amongst projects either did not exist or they weren't used properly. This will create many difficulties for the informational users as they have no idea what value to place on what risk. So these managers cannot communicate properly between each other and to top-level management. The lack of this collaboration between all users of that information was noticeable to the company insiders. As Fraser put it, risk management was a contact sport, meaning many arguments would break out between managers and there was no collaboration between the two. Typically, whoever spoke the loudest won priority. This came from the management's belief that they did not need structure or other input to make decisions properly. They relied only on their experience or whatever management book they read last. This obstinate behavior would lead to mishandling of projects, mishandling of communication, and mishandling of resources. So the department that needed it the most might not get what they needed because the manager of that department could not speak loud enough. It's sad but important to note. The Chief Risk Officer, John Fraser, advocated if a company does not have risk management, it would be like driving a car without brakes. This was a tough determination to make, but it is correct. In observing the risk culture of Hydro One, we find a few things. First of all, they wish to be listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange, which insisted that the public companies it listed utilize strategic risk management and could quantify the risk that it faced. These new public and corporate policies increased the uncertainty of Hydro One's future, so the two ideas played off of each other, getting listed on the stock exchange and having an ERM program that created value. The CRO, Fraser, believed that ERM should start with the senior management, so it should be emphasized at the top and work its way down. The firm needed a mutual understanding of the critical risk it faces, mutual meaning each department understood what each other department was facing. Most of all, the firm needed to change its attitude toward risk. It needed to emphasize it, bring it to the forefront. The ultimate goal of Fraser was to create a strategic plan to make Hydro One the best transmission and distribution business in North America. He believed this could be done by having the best safety record in the world, an upper quartile transmission and distribution reliability, meaning the customers had the power when they needed it, to own 90% customer satisfaction rates, and to improve the employee productivity and company credit rating so that all long-term debt was rated as A or above, and all employees were productive for their entire shift. To enact an effective ERM program, Fraser realized that changes needed to be made, and he was the one that needed to foster those changes. So he introduced a 3-phase program. Phase 1 included workshops just to get the teams talking. We needed to develop communication pipelines so managers would feel comfortable giving their risks to the risk team. Semi-annual reviews were phase 2. One-on-one management interviews would be used to assess and monitor the risks outlined in the workshops. And phase 3 was planning, prioritizing, and allocating resources appropriately. All of these programs' goals were to positively change the company culture. The importance of this RM culture was emphasized by asking questions. Managers were probed on the crucial risks facing the company or for that project. Collaboration and discussion was strongly encouraged at each step of the program, and consultative decision-making was promoted by voting, deliberating, and voting again on each risk plan. Fraser realized that this risk assessment project was subjective. So he created an objective way to take a look at it. The risk team would create an impact probability risk map based on each manager's input. Fraser would integrate the feedback from all departments at Hydro One, and then he would emphasize on continually monitoring and reviewing the dynamic risks. It's important to realize that risks are not static and the business environment is always changing. And here's a close-up of the risk map that Fraser created that we mentioned in the last slide. So this is going to be a visual depiction of each department's residual risks and the impact they have on the firm. Each one was identified on a worst-case scenario basis on a 2 to 3 year forward timeline, meaning at the very possible case, how would this affect the firm within 2 to 3 years? The size of the bubble represents the strength of control the firm has over that risk. The larger bubble means a larger degree of control, and the scale of magnitude on the y-axis will indicate the severity of that outcome. So a 5 is the worst, a 1 is not as severe, but if it's on this map, you can believe that it will still impact the viability of Hydro One. The mapping of these risks will make it easier to create objectivity in that subjective risk assessment process. The impartiality of this map promotes discussion. Some managers would still believe that their risks were more important, but it's on the map, so it's easier to determine for the other users of that program. John Fraser encouraged the flow of information and responsibility between managers. The ERM policy stated risk management is everyone's responsibility from the board of directors to the individual employees. And Fraser realized his role was to constantly be asking questions to each user in the program. Fraser understood that consultative decision-making at every phase was key. Defining the risk significance and scale became a group project that each manager would speak to the team about. The most important risks were placed on a short list and then brought up in meetings, debated, voted on, and placed on the risk map. The integrated use of the strategic objectives and current events and prior risk assessments allowed Fraser to set the context of the meetings and provide clarity to each user. The risk profile templates gave managers a structured assessment, allowing them to re-rank risks higher or lower based on their trends and trajectories. So risks that were trending downward, getting worse, were brought further to the attention of senior management. Fraser understood that embedding the risk culture in the firm was absolutely critical. The ERM meetings put risk management at the forefront of each manager's decision-making. The visualization of risk created a roadmap to make it easier to implement those programs, and managers were designated as owners of their corresponding risks, meaning the transmission manager would be the owner of risks facing the transmission department, same as a distribution manager. The ERM strategy empowered risk owners to initiate change when those risks threaten the firm's health, meaning if there was a new government guideline that would create difficulties for the firm to realize profitability, those would probably be placed higher on the list, and that would allow for greater visibility of that risk. Now we'll take a quick look at Hydro One's risk program versus JPL's program, which was discussed as the first case in the class. So as we can see, there are many similarities between the two programs. Fraser had a risk map, Gentry Lee had a heat map. Both ranked risks in terms of severity and likelihood of occurrence. Both firms collaboratively managed the firm's critical risks and were given the utmost importance by both ERM programs. Both programs encourage in-depth discussion across the departments. No one department is more important than the other. They all need to work together. Both Lee and Fraser deeply understood that everyone's job is risk management. The ERM programs at both firms sought to make the subjective decision-making into an objective process, meaning ranks were given to each risk and placed in an easy-to-see order from top to bottom. And of course, both firms focused on the safety and relied heavily on the implementation of new technologies. JPL ultimately depended on whether or not they would wait the 18 months for the new technology to come out, where Hydro One is always reacting to the new technology that comes out. There are a few key differences between Hydro One and JPL's ERM programs. Lee's program was focused on a single project, whether or not to launch the rocket. Fraser focused on continuous improvement. So Fraser's program has no end. It will only improve with time. JPL's program served a specific purpose that did not affect the general public. It really only affected the JPL program. Hydro One's sole business is serving the general public utilities. So a little bit different there. Lee had one crucial decision to make, and Fraser has to make crucial decisions constantly during semi-annual meetings. Some of these decisions could make or break Hydro One if a discussion cannot be had and a decision cannot be made. JPL did not have to worry about customer satisfaction. There are no customers. Whereas Hydro One's main focus is on improving customer satisfaction. That is a big difference. Now we'll take a look at how an organization adopts its ERM structure. Comparing JPL and Hydro One will suggest that there are more similarities than differences between all risk management programs, meaning teamwork and open discussion will be essential parts of any ERM structure. We must get the managers talking with each other. The objectivity in risk rankings provides a framework for productive collaboration, meaning it's easier for managers to work with each other when they can see on a scale whether or not that risk will affect the firm as a whole or whether it's just relevant to that project. The ERM program must understand that there are things that we cannot prevent, but we must know that we cannot prevent them. And in choosing the proper ERM structure is dependent on the firm's area of expertise, meaning Hydro One cannot take JPL's program verbatim into its company. The structure of ERM must be cohesive and relevant to the company operations. Of course, the best ERM structure is the one that allows for the greatest probability of success, and the failure to adopt and adhere to define risk management practices can and will put a firm out of business. A critical risk that goes unchecked will bankrupt a firm. The firm must choose an ERM that creates the greatest value, not just some value. Risk management should in the end be a profit center, not a cost center.
Okay, so now we're going to investigate the bigger picture, and basically we're going to take a look at why companies value ERM programs, especially in down markets where the risks that they're trying to mitigate are a little bit more severe and they come along with large potential losses. Obviously in the up market, it's going to be hard to justify the expenses that these ERM programs need in order to be successful based on the value that is actually created from the ERM program. So we're going to try and tie value to Hydro One's ERM program. So in order to measure the value that the ERM program actually creates for Hydro One, we have to try and come up with some costs associated with implementing and managing this ERM program. As we stated earlier, the ERM strategy of Hydro One consists of 3 different phases. Phase 1 is a series of workshops that is conducted by the risk team and key managers, and basically this is just an open forum where employees and managers can come together and explore different issues that pose particular problems for them and their department. From here, they can develop a collective understanding of what key strategic objectives Hydro One has and any risks that they would face that would hinder the accomplishment of these objectives. CRO John Fraser, he actually wanted at least 12 of these per year, but they ended up being significantly more. I think one year they did like 60. Phase 2 is compiling of a corporate risk profile. Basically what a corporate risk profile is, it's like a report card that's outlining their principal risks. It's put together by John and his risk team, And basically what they do is they host one-on-one meetings with key management on a semi-annual basis to keep track of these risks. It's basically a way to audit previous risks and mitigation efforts towards those risks. It gives them a way to gauge whether the risk has been mitigated, does the risk still exist, has the external environment surrounding the risk changed, and from here they can go ahead and assign a rating for the risk from low all the way to very high based on the perceived severity at that point in time. And it's just a visual way to allow them to track the trends of risk that they've been facing on a 6-month basis. Phase 3 is the allocation of resources to projects that attempt to mitigate risk based on cost of the project and severity of the risk being mitigated. Once we go through that, we can kind of do a cost-benefit analysis and see if the program is beneficial for Hydro One or not. In order to do our cost-benefit analysis, we have to compile all costs associated with our mitigation efforts. What we can include is cost of project investment and all the costs associated with the 3 phases of our risk management framework. Once we have a value for these costs, we can go ahead and compare them to the benefits derived from our mitigation efforts. And the way we do that is we have to estimate our potential losses if our risks were left unmitigated. This value can actually only be known after losses occur, and so it kind of becomes a little bit more subjective at this point. But basically, if the benefits outweigh the costs for the ERM program, then it should continue. Now we're going to take a look at why the ERM program at Hydro One was so effective for them. On the left, you see Hydro One's ERM program, and on the right, you see the traditional way that a company would go about mitigating their risks. The traditional way, each department is a silo, and so it's kind of enclosed, and each department is seen as rivals because they're competing for limited resources, and so they do not share information, and thus there is no cohesiveness between the different departments. When you manage risks in this fashion, your resources can really be mismanaged because although you might be mitigating an extreme risk for that department, it might not be a heavy risk overall that the company faces. Hydro One, on the other hand, with their workshops, basically they're allowing each department to come in and voice their opinions, and they're sharing information, and they're gathering their thoughts about what risks are the most important that the company is facing overall. This makes them more cross-functional, and they're building trust and cohesiveness throughout the organization. And when you manage your risks in this fashion, your resources are most likely going to be put to the best use. So just to conclude, we feel like Hydro One should continue their 3-step ERM process as it currently is, and that's just for the simple fact that it has proven its effectiveness in building cohesion throughout the organization. All the top managers are on the same page about the most severe risk that Hydro One faces, and this is partly due to the corporate risk profile. It's the most useful tool that they have in order to kind of track where these risks are, where they were previously, where they currently are, and where they're headed in the near future. So they should definitely continue to review these risks every 6 months like they are. In our opinion, Hydro One cannot really afford to discontinue their ERM program, and that's just because the world of energy is constantly changing with the new regulations, pushing renewable energy and the new technology coming out in order to conserve more energy within the household. They're going to always continue to face the risks that they have been, and they may face new challenges in the future. Who knows? I just want to thank you guys for tuning in to our presentation, and I hope everybody has a good summer.